I did my due diligence with the DNA, and then I went a step farther with the archaeology and anthropology. To be code word compliant, the evidence is consistent with the idea of one race moving from central Anatolia to central Italy by way of Crete. If after all of this you still want to believe the Romans are from Switzerland or the Balkans, then good luck with that, because I'm about to piggy pile on even more. With the Çatalhöyük, my race drops onto the world scene with a bang.
If we take these figures as representative for the settlement as a whole, and assuming that living rooms index household groups of about 5 people, we would arrive at a maximum population of about 3,000. If we reconstruct 25 to 50% of the site as not in use even during the period of maximum occupation, the estimates would fall to 1,500 to 2,250 people. This is a surprisingly large population for the earliest Neolithic settlement documented in Asia Minor. In neighboring regions, the earliest Neolithic communities are often estimated to have been no larger than about 300 people.
Did you see that? Earliest Neolithic settlement, surprisingly large population. It was a bang, and it was just the beginning. Çatalhöyük was even bigger, 5 to 7,000. It went as high as 10. When that happened is a very interesting time in European history, and it would hold a world record for nearly 3,000 years, long after the first cities in Mesopotamia. You could chalk this up as a cultural thing, but I think I've made a strong case that we're looking at evolutionary innovation. Not compelling, but interesting. So let's digest what I've established in the first 5 segments and get a preview of what's coming up next.
We start with our migrations. If you've been watching this series and my series on the Festus disk, you're familiar with this one. We moved across the Dodecanese and Cyclades islands into Crete and southern Greece. It seems from looking at the DNA it was 2 major migrations, about 6,500 and 3,000 BC. I'm sure there were thousands of micro-migrations before and since.
So was something going on at Çatalhöyük in 6,500 BC? Yep. Let's go back to the Hodder lecture we used in part 5. The leopard changes its spots.
This also relates to fertility as measured as the number of children per adult. And what we see is that, again, from the human remains work, what we see is that in the early period, which is that sort of wet phase, if you like, you have a low fertility. In the middle phase that we're talking about now, MNO, you have high fertility, and then it drops down again here. So not only do you have high density and high population, you have high fertility, but what we also see is more stress and more work and more hard work that people are having to be involved in. So osteoperiosteitis is here used by the human remains team as a measure of non-specific stress on the body. And what you see is that they don't have the earliest sort of wet phase here, but this sort of middle phase has very high values compared with the later phase. So that's suggesting that there is more stress on the body during the same MNO or level 6, level 7, 6 period. Similarly with osteoarthritis, which has been used by the human remains team as a measure of workload. And what this is showing is that in this middle phase that we're talking about, you always have higher levels of individuals with osteoarthritis. So on the left of the diagram here, you've got a higher level here amongst young adults, higher in the MNO phase than in later. With middle-aged adults, you get, again, more in the MNO phase than later, and with older adults, again, much more severe evidence of hard work in the MNO period or level 6 period and in the later period. So we're building up this sort of really quite clear pattern then of greater density, more ritual elaboration, more burial, more going on, this is classic Çatalhöyük.
This is a prime migration scenario. People are overworked, overstressed, and overpopulated. This is when Çatalhöyük hits its peak. I told you that's an interesting time in European history. Her first civilization came out of Crete. And I wouldn't be surprised if people went straight from Çatalhöyük to Crete. It's a well-known island. There are not a lot of people living there. It's a chain of arid plains surrounded by mountains, so it looked like home. The place was made for us. And in a crazy similar way, so was Central Italy. I'll show you that at the end of this segment. See how everything just runs into place here? Linguists who think the Indo-European language came out of Anatolia, and we will grant once again they are the minority, also think it spread out of Anatolia precisely at this time. If the language did not come from Anatolia, it does a good job of pretending like it did. So if I turn out to be wrong, I'm not going to feel stupid. I'm just following the links. While I'm not 100% this is my tribe, I'm about 70-30 actually, I know some of us Anatolians were in Zakia in Iran sometime before 5000 BC. It's near the capital of Tehran. I know this because they have a temple that, so far, only has architectural parallels in Çatalhöyük. And its predecessor, Çatalhöyük. Let's recall a quote from part 5. Court T was painted in various colors, had a large round hearth, a type not found elsewhere, so maybe this is important, benches along its edge. That would be the temple at Zakia in Iran. They sent the ones they loved to the big world, just like we did, in the belly of our mother, with the blood of our mother. Remember us, sister. Then there are the DNA maps I showed you in part 2, which told me to expect a find like this, specifically the M530s and the M67s. I wish I had more to report from Iran, but from what I can gather, the archaeology's barely budged since the 1979 revolution.
Then, of course, there's our Bronze Age migration into Italy. It was an ongoing process between 1800 and 1100 BC, peaking about 1200 BC. So it's not a coincidence that the first Aryan empire of the Hittites bloomed near our homeland of south-central Anatolia. That was followed by the Persian Empire, the first giant multinational empire in the history of the world. Now, the first Iranian kingdom that we know of is the Elamite. I haven't looked into them in depth, but I'm confident they're not related to us and are more of a Mesopotamian phenomenon. Finally, the whale in the bathtub, Rome, the most enduring, long-lived empire in history, certainly if you throw in Byzantium, which I do. The continuity of government and leadership and DNA between the two empires is undeniable. Now let's look at the Indo-European language. I accept that the Yamna people spread out of modern-day southern Russia into Europe about 5,000 years ago, but I will remind you from part 3 that they are Eastern hunter-gatherers who mixed with a Middle Eastern group similar to the Armenians, who in turn had probably already mixed with us. The Armenians certainly have. And this is happening on their territory, not ours. We're pushing into the bigger world here. Everyone will tell you that the Indo-European language moved in from them to us, but I'm sticking to my guns here. There's not a shred of physical evidence backing that up. There is a formidable linguistic case, but it's not airtight, and a sizable minority of professional linguists would agree with me on the larger picture, though probably not my detailed case. Another problem is that for these people to get to us, they had to first get through the Kura-Araxes culture, which was a local culture influenced only by its immediate neighbors that existed for several centuries before and after the Yamna invasion of Europe. It's the same thing with the Iranian language. We're told a group of pastoralists who didn't even have agriculture and never built a city in their history suddenly swoop in, put us in our place, and start building an empire. Even better, no earlier than 1000 BC, past the Bronze Age and well into the Iron Age. I'm likewise confident the historians got that backward, especially when you hook the broader linguistic picture up with the hard facts of the ground. The Iranian speakers have a deep Stone Age connection with the Armenians and the Greeks. And how is that supposed to have happened if they came from Russia? No, and don't be ridiculous.
Finally, this is what we know for a fact. I'm not going to argue over how these facts came to be, but even though I still have a lot of evidence to present, I am going to insist there was a huge migration into central Italy, largely from Crete and southern Greece, during the Bronze Age. I've already put that ball in your court if you don't agree with me.
We know for a fact we have the precursors of the German and Celtic languages in Central and Eastern Europe sometime on or after 3000 BC. They are dominated by the R1b Y chromosome, which in turn dominates Western Europe today. We know for a fact from Assyrian documents that men dominated by the J2a Y chromosome are speaking Anatolian languages in Turkey about 2000 BC. We know this is by far the oldest of all the Aryan languages, and we know this is a southern language and not a northern language. We also know that it pushed from the south to the north. We will not argue over how it got to the south in the first place. About 1800 BC, we have Aryans coming out of Russia and sweeping into Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. They speak Eastern Iranian languages and are dominated by men with the R1a Y chromosome. Thus, they are related to the Russians and the Polish and the other Slavic people. We know about 1200 BC, J2a men either speaking or acquiring Italic languages like Latin are pouring into Italy. I say we're already speaking it, and I think we're getting close to clinching the argument, especially when you factor in my work on the Festus disc, parts 2 and 3, but I've still got a row to hoe on that. By 1000 BC, we know there are people speaking Western Iranian languages in Iran itself. We know they are dominated by J2a men today. Regardless of whether they are the original speakers or were conquered, these are the facts. Finally, we have Yamna descendants speaking Celtic languages swooping into Italy on or before 400 BC. They pick a fight with the Romans and their neighbors almost immediately.
Well, now that we have enough DNA in to show that we were not in Europe in the Stone Age in large numbers, we covered that in part 3. The next question is, who was living in central Italy when we got there? Did we conquer them? Did we expel them? Did we enslave them? Well, I already covered that with the DNA. There was a small population, mostly living in the Apennine Mountains. Hardly anybody was living in the lowlands, where Rome would be built and where the Romans would build their farms. The archaeology liberally supports this.
This is from The Transition to Farming in Southeast Europe, Perspectives from Pottery. The author has some splendid maps to show us from the Neolithic. This is monochrome impresso pottery dispersal. You will notice the same pattern in every one of these maps. There's nothing in central Italy. This is impressocardium and red painted pottery distributions. This is the distribution of early Neolithic stamp seals and tokens. The next one is congruent distribution of Neolithic painted pottery and ceramic figurines with Y chromosome lineages. The hatches are the painted pottery. The figurines are the orange-colored areas. Once again, nothing in central Italy. Both artifacts are in southern Italy. We have figurines in northern Italy and southern France, where I'm pretty sure the M530s did settle during the Stone Age, as we discussed in part 3. They even made it to Sardinia. The next is Transition of Farming in Southeast Europe, Perspectives from Pottery. Once again, nothing in central Italy. You can see the Tiber River plain as day. Rome's right on it. And here we are over in Turkey. Some of us are here in Sicilia too. As you can see, we moved into the Neolithic early on. Now, Neolithic pots and potters in Europe, the end of Dimic diffusion migratory model. Remember from part 3, Apulia in 6500 BC and the J2 M530s? Well, here we are. Once again, as you can see, I'm not just making this stuff up. And in Apulia, which is exactly where the DNA said these men did indeed show up first. Then we have the migration to the Balkans on the right, and on up into the rest of Italy and southern France and Spain, just like the DNA shows, as long as you correct for the crazy long ages.
This poverty of evidence for settlement in central Italy is striking. I mean, my God, this is Rome. Well, I can sum up the answer in 2 words. Mountains. Malaria. Here's Latium, Umbria, and the Marches, the classic papal states. The mountains and hills in the Marches go almost all the way to the shoreline. Here's what any large population had to deal with if they wanted to move into the lowlands of central Italy. It's why nobody moved here in the Stone Age. Volcanic deposits disrupted the natural drainage system in the coastal plain south of Rome, producing many lagoons and marshes, until recently very familiar in the landscape immediately south of Rome.
The last residues of these marshes in the Pontine Plain were not drained until the 1930s. These are the 7 hills of Rome. This is the Capitoline, where the city first started. Now, across the field of Mars, where Rome's young men would do their military training, and across the Tiber River, we have the Vatican Hill, where the Pope presides. A lot of people think the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon because Babylon in Revelation sits on 7 hills, like Rome. Well, as you can see, the Vatican isn't one of the 7 hills. But the word hill can also mean mountain. And Jerusalem has 7 hills that they call mountains, including Mount Zion.
So the whore's Babylon is Jerusalem, not Rome. Nobody ever accused the Romans of being whores. God calls the Israelites whores all the time. Now, as much as I like the data and mathematical models the authors of the previous text gave us, mountains of it, they lowball how hard it was for the Romans to get that city up and running. And about that, they go on for several hundred pages talking about Latium Venus, but not one time do they ever mention the Romans, as if Latium Venus is just some disembodied thing that just pulled itself together. And that's a trend in modern-day scholarship, that in the carefully controlled deracinating jargon. They want to talk about European civilization, but they don't want to talk about all those pesky white people who built it. I would go as far as to say they're trying to steal credit from us and give it to everybody else. It wasn't just the area south of Rome that was the problem. Rome herself was a tough nut to crack.
In Rome, the urban development of the low-lying valleys between the hills, and particularly of the Forum Valley, required the reclamation of marshy areas by means of drainage. The achievement of this task is usually attributed to the Etruscans, who were thought to have been especially skilled in hydrology. The evidence is that the countryside of southern Etruria is riddled with drainage tunnels, caniculi, designed to divert streams and to channel surface moisture away from waterlogged areas. Some of them are remarkable feats of hydraulic engineering. The trouble is that the caniculi of the same type can be found in Latium as well as South Etruria, and since they are impossible to date, there is no way of telling whether the Etruscan ones are earlier or later than the Latin ones.
As I said in part 4 when I was talking about the DNA of modern-day Tuscany, we Cretans also settled in southern Etruria, so it was as much Latin as it was Etruscan. Thus, it really doesn't matter where the caniculi were built first. I predict if we ever get an answer, it'll be southern Etruria. We didn't settle the Papal States until the very end. And as for the city, let's look at that map again.
The low-lying valleys between the hills of Rome is most of Rome. Something that made a great city like Rome possible in central Italy is the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer. The Cloaca Maxima's command over illness depended on its ability to drain water from the valleys. Before the Cloaca Maxima, the Roman Forum and the city itself appeared vastly different. Archaic homes clung to the sides of Roman hills, perched over the valleys that dotted the landscape. The Tiber River would flood at regular intervals every year so that the lowlands, such as that of the Roman Forum, would transform into marshes, and ditches were dank with waters that flooded back from the river. Specifically, the Roman Forum acted like a bowl, because the lowest parts of the basin were far below the annual flood level. And although a few tombs and temporary archaic structures stood in the Forum before the drain, stagnant water rendered these areas uninhabitable for long-term use. If Rome continued to suffer severe problems with malaria throughout its history, good Lord, did the Cloaca Maxima actually control disease? Consider another failed city that had no such water drainage infrastructure, Ostia Antica. From the 4th century BC to the 1st century AD, it thrived as one of Rome's primary ports. Before long, the port severely silted over, the city plummeted into a precipitous collapse, and most people abandoned Ostia. Malaria may have played a large part in this collapse. While the port was still functional, the salinity of the seawater curbed the mosquito population. As the city gradually moved away from the coast, marshy lakes replaced the harbors and brackish water replaced seawater. Mosquitoes wreaked havoc on the region, newly toxic from its hot, humid, and desalinated climate. It degenerated so badly that by the 11th century, the Bishop of Ostia requested to leave his appointment due to the inherent danger of living there.
So the challenge handed to the Romans was to move all that dangerous, stagnant water out of the city before they can go about their business of building a great civilization. But what a coincidence. The challenge handed to the Cretans was to move all that critical, life-giving water into the parched zones before they can go about their business of building a great civilization. Challenge accepted.
This is from Minoan Aqueducts, a Pioneering Technology. One of the major achievements of the Minoans was the advanced water management techniques practiced in Crete at that time. The advanced water distribution systems in various Minoan palaces and settlements is remarkable because no aqueducts are known before the Minoan era, while strong evidence suggests that this technology was developed by the Minoans. Thereafter, aqueducts were used by the Mycenaeans in continental Greece. The achievements of the Minoans in dealing with the aqueducts and the functional requirements of water distribution systems can only be compared to modern urban water systems, re-established in Europe and North America from the second half of the 19th century AD. This is the possible layout of the Tylissos aqueduct in north-central Crete. This is some of the infrastructure used to support that aqueduct.
So we're on the move. But notice we're not building an empire, not until Rome, when I would argue we were in existential peril. We were surrounded by great powers that we did not trust. The Celts were violent. The Carthaginians were creepy tribalist game players with a lot of money and a big navy. I used to think we built the Catholic Church because we couldn't rule an empire anymore. There's truth to that, but not the whole truth. We're also back to doing what we were before the empire, creating high religion, high art, high architecture, and high philosophy. I tell you, you have no idea how far the Catholic Church is ahead of her rivals. And I'm not just talking about Christians. I mean everybody. We've all been born and bred on the same tired old propaganda. Her achievements are largely immaterial and impossible to see unless you've been properly trained. Did you know the famous Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung said more than once that he had hardly any Catholic patients? Virtually all of his patients were Protestants or atheists or Jews. There's a reason for that. I'm learning about the Church's achievements now, but there's also a lot of unlearning to be done. This might be what my next series is about, although I'm not sure. I'm winding down the creation phase and gearing up the learning phase, getting ready to move back into my cocoon so I can pupate. That's what my race does, by the way. It's part of our extended phenotype. We like to move into isolated areas so we can be alone. We did it in Anatolia, we did it on Crete, we did it on central Italy. I bet when the archaeology comes in, you'll see we did it in Iran, too. You guys are too loud. Okay, in the next series, we're going to talk about more fun parallels among the Romans, the Cretans, and the Anatolians. And what is the 411 on those Phrygians?